Hi, Dakota. This is Mr. Habel. I'm going to work to catch you up on the first couple slides of our cultural unit on the Roman Republic. I'm going to pause it at that point, and then you'll be in a different environment where we're looking at the later slides and incorporating participation questions from classmates. Doing an experiment with the mic to see if I can speak to the microphone from a distance and have it record. So um, here I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to stand up, move away from the mic, and raise my voice just a little bit. Don't be frightened. Um, the dates for the Roman Republic, uh, as you'll find in the blue Ecce Romani, and maybe recall from last year, the Republic began in 509 BC after the expulsion of the last of the seven kings. And the Republic as a whole, as a form of government, lasted until 31 BC when it was replaced by rule of emperors. When we discuss the Republic, for the purpose of this PowerPoint, this discussion, we are actually going to be focusing on the early period in the Republic, as later periods, well, suffice it to say, we'll cover some changes in the Republic that occurred in later periods when we are in Latin 3. So, some key features of the Roman Republic that help to both differentiate it from and make it similar to our own republic as a form of government. One key difference, the social classes of ancient Rome affected how people were, how do I want to say this, the extent to which they could vote and be involved in Roman politics. And those social classes were based on a combination of factors. In some social classes, your family ancestry allowed you to be part of that social class or prevented you from being part of a social class. In addition, the Romans, as we sort of talked about in our clothing unit, used wealth as a distinguishing factor in assigning people to voting groups, as well as to groups with certain social prestige. And also, the political experience that one's family had, one's direct ancestors had, or that one had in one's earlier life, could create mobility between social classes. Another feature of the Republic, one that our founding fathers very clearly found of appealing value, was the election of magistrates, of essentially elected officials, to offices that had defined powers and limited terms, so that the idea of someone becoming president for life or senator for life, I shouldn't use that example of senator for life, but becoming president for life or consul for life was not possible within the Republic until some very strange people came along and tried to do such things. In addition, the Roman Republic, it's worth noting, much like the early American Republic, was only a political body that incorporated male citizens. The Roman Republic never incorporated female citizens into voting groups or into elected office, but instead various groups of male citizens, or as I say, bodies of male citizens, gathered to advise elected officials, to approve of treaties and laws, and also to elect officials for subsequent terms. Overall, in the Republic, it's important to note that there was transition, there was variation, just as within our own American government, there have been periods where, for example, U.S. senators used to be appointed. Now they're elected by the voters. In ancient Rome, there were transitions and changes in the rules. So We have to be sensitive to the fact that no government form is perfect or consistent from its beginning. There was some flexibility built into the Republic, some room for compromise in certain situations. There was also a certain rigidity, especially in social classes, and the privileges that were assigned to those. There was also in ancient Rome the lack of a written constitution. So very much unlike our founding document, the Constitution of the United States, Rome lacked a single document that was meant to give guidelines for the operation of the government. Instead, Rome had a variety of laws, some passed early in the Republic, some passed later, which changed how the government operated. There was also a set of unwritten laws. I guess you could call them more traditions because they weren't laws. Traditions that the Romans valued, but every once in a while they chose to jettison in favor of what was convenient or necessary or seemed necessary at the moment. So, very long-winded introduction, but there it is. Next, when we move to talk about the Roman Republic, we should really start with a discussion of Rome's social classes. And we'll go ahead and start with the highest of the social classes, which was made up of the senators. By the way, the Latin word for social classes in the plural form is ordines. Okay? And the topmost social class in the Republic was the senatorial class, referred to in Latin either by the phrase senatores, the noun senatores, or the phrase patres conscripti, which means the enrolled fathers, as in enrolled on a list of people. And they were fathers because, as you may recall from Latin 1, Romulus originally chose male heads of household, male pater familiae, to come together and advise him and subsequent kings on matters of importance to the whole of Rome. Throughout the period of the kings, the Senate played that advisory role, with the heads of households, the descendants of those heads of households, originally chosen by Romulus, subsequently filling in when their fathers passed away or became incapable of being senators. So what I want to tell you is that early on, a position in the Senate was hereditary. But after the ejection of the kings, when Rome created the Republic, the Romans decided to, for the purposes of having experienced people not just inherit the position in the Senate, but through their experience and qualifications become members of the Senate, the Romans adopted a practice where the senators were chosen from people who had previously been elected to high political office. And having proved their worth in those offices, after their retirement from those offices, some of those individuals were chosen to be members of the Senate. Okay. Within the senatorial class, there was a special group called the patricii, not to be confused with patricia, but patricii means patricians, or people whose fathers and grandfathers and so on were the original. Sorry, too many interruptions. I'm going to go ahead and pause this now. Okay, Dakota, sorry for the awkward pause there. I'm now one period later in the day trying to figure out where I left off in the discussion of the senatorial order or the senatorial class. And as I recall, I was trying to explain that within the senatorial class, there was a special subgroup called the patricii, or patricians, who were direct lineal descendants through their father, their grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on back of the original 100 senators of Rome. And it is not to say that they had special privileges in the operation of the Republic, except one that they did have was they were able to meet in a special assembly. We'll be talking about assemblies shortly. But in a special assembly that was charged with the selection of Rome's priests. And there's a big intersection in ancient Rome between religion and politics and government, more so than there is in the modern United States. And the patricians, because of their ancient family tradition and their traditional role of serving in those priesthoods, they were the special group chosen to elect priests. And for reasons we'll talk about later, that could have a potential impact on governance and politics. Who the priests were could have such an influence. But we'll get to that at a later slide. What I do also want to say about the patricians, though, is that they were looked to as being, how do I want to say it, special without certain special privileges. They were, they were given the same sort of respect that in the United States, someone who bore the last name of Washington or Jefferson or Paine or Adams would have if they were a direct descendant of one of the founding fathers of the United States. A certain respect, a certain recognition, and a certain prestige without any super extraordinary privileges. Okay, on to the third bullet point. As I think you know from our discussion of Roman clothing, the Roman social classes were based on property value owned by that individual, or in some cases that individual's family. Through most of the Republic, the minimum property qualification for someone to hold or get selected to be a member of the Senate once the Senate was an appointed post was 1 million sesterces. Using the equivalence scale that we used to use in Latin 1, it's about $5 million worth of real property. Real property would be land and buildings, not cash, gold, or other objects which can be easily disposed of or destroyed. And that meant that, of course, the decisions that people who were senators made those decisions were made by people who were wealthy. And sometimes people who are wealthy have a different perspective than other people in the population. And so when we talk about some of the struggles that occurred later between different classes in Roman society, it's because senators tended to have most of the power and influence in Rome's government. They were the class from which elected officials were most commonly chosen. And also, because they were senators, they had the ability to influence discussions and debates after their term of elected office was done. And that power and influence in the hands of the senators was something that was both a source of strength and a source of tension in ancient Rome. The source of strength that the Romans saw in it is based on the notion that the people who have the greatest wealth have the greatest amount invested in the prosperity of Rome, and that the defense of Rome, the protection of Rome, the preservation of Rome should be, the decisions surrounding that should be in the hands of people who have the most to lose if Rome is damaged or harmed. That theory also held the component that people who were wealthy in ancient Rome were used to managing large, complex organizations. It could be a network of farms with thousands of slaves on it. It could be, in some cases, a network of political dependents and clients and so on. But again, the idea is people who, because of their wealth and their prestige that they may have inherited or had from their own work, once they had that wealth and management opportunities with it, that those people were going to be more fit to manage the decisions and execute the decisions that Rome's government needed to have. So that's the basis of the social classes, at least the senatorial class. A final note on the bullet point, that in the later part of Rome's history as a republic, it is worth noting that the senatorial class really only represented about 2% of Rome's citizen population. And I don't just mean the population in the city of Rome itself, but throughout the Republic as Rome expanded to include all of Italy and the overseas provinces that they acquired during the Punic Wars, and citizens were settled out in those distant territories. All of that citizen population, through the majority of Rome's history, only 1 or 2% were made up of senators. Okay, I'm going to stop now and press the pause button. There should be more coming when the Period 5 class comes in and I am able to resume. Talk to you soon. Woo! Phrase of the day. For Dakota's sake, this is an interruption in the culture unit that we're doing, but I wanted to include the phrase of the day in it, so off we go. Today's phrase of the day is Ante Kibble. Hey, guess what's on the plate? All kinds of food. Okay? And you guys, being the brilliant young people that you are, can tell me what Ante Kibble, or the abbreviation AC, which is commonly seen on prescriptions that are written by a doctor and given to a pharmacist. So the pharmacist can dispense the medication. AC means before food. Okay? I don't know if any of you take medications on a regular basis. I do, because I'm old. Okay? And my doctor wrote on the prescription AC, along with the quantity and the name of the drug. And the pharmacist translated that for me as a dumb English speaker. That's me, not the pharmacist. She translated that into take before food. Okay? Now, every once in a while, you get 2 phrases of the day for the price of 1. Guess what post-kibble means? After food. And how would that be abbreviated on a doctor's script? PC. Yes. Not to be confused with politically correct or anything else. Okay? So on a script, or script as it's commonly called, the actual prescription that's written by a doctor and given to a pharmacist, you might see these abbreviations if you're ever making the journey between the doctor's office and the pharmacy with that slip in your hand. I do it all the time. Okay? Questions? Yay! All right, that was today's phrase of the day. We're going to end that discussion. Again, 2 for the price of 1. I'm going to go ahead and try to ask you guys. Oops, that's the wrong thing altogether. Ding. Where's my little button that ends the show? Isn't it strange to have the projector working and the smartboard working? It's strange for me. I had totally forgotten how to operate in the week and a half that it wasn't working. All right. So, you guys have a quiz coming down the road in lesson 39. We're going to talk about that in the last 10 minutes of the class period. When I do that, I will also run out and quickly make the photocopies of that worksheet that I promised to you earlier. But for now, what I'd like to do is, as swiftly as possible, make the transition back to the culture lecture. By the way, not to tell you something that you already know, but let me ask you, do you see if you already know this? What's the value of taking good notes and learning material well in cultural presentations as well as in vocab and grammar presentations?
You can use it on the test.
You can use it on the test, right? Okay. Very short-term strategy. I'm going to listen so I can do the homework and pass the test.
For the final.
Oh, the final. Okay. True. The final is important, and this material will show up on the final. Why are my Latin 3 students all of a sudden really valuing the lecture and note-taking and worksheet doing that they did this time last year?
Because they actually know it for next year.
Right, because this is, especially this lecture, is a cultural concept that recycles. We're doing a lecture on the early structure of the Republic in Latin 2. In Latin 3, we come back to discuss how the Republic fell apart. And then fell apart is not quite the right phrase, but how Romans essentially, through their ambitions and through exploiting weaknesses in the Republic, essentially did it in. Okay? And the Republic was transformed into a rule of emperors. So, my way of telling you guys, this comes back, okay? And those of you who are in 9th grade, next year is your Western Civ class in social studies, and I can tell you that I don't want to say you can snooze through the Rome unit, because that would be the wrong approach. But you can really impress people in the Rome unit that's part of Western Civ. You'll know 2/3 of everything that you'll encounter there. And also, it gives you a leg up on potentially choosing a research paper topic for 10th grade Western Civ, which everyone has to write, and yeah, all that good stuff. Okay, so, can we move on to the second of the social classes? Good, I've already done so in the PowerPoint. The second tier of social classes in ancient Rome was known as the Equestrian Order. Okay? In Latin, it was commonly referred to by one of two phrases. Simply the word equites, the second option up there, equites, simply means horsemen or knights. The first phrase, Ordo Equestris, means, well, the Equestrian Order, or the Equestrian class. It's worth noting, carrying over from, hey, one of those other magical culture discussions we had, the unit on Roman clothing, that the Equestrian Order originated out of a group of Roman citizens who were wealthy enough to afford to keep and train a horse and accompanying equipment for use in warfare. And in origin, the Equestrian Order served as Rome's cavalry. They were men who were wealthy enough to afford to raise and keep a horse, to train it for use in combat, and to fight upon that horse when Rome was at war. Okay. So the origin of the social class has to do with a military need that these wealthy people filled. But over the course of time, the connection with actually serving as cavalry kind of disappeared. And you guys will tell me why. Because we had that other excellent unit on the Roman military.
Because the army professionalized?
Right, because the army professionalized, and as far as cavalry goes,
most cavalrymen were non-citizens.
right, there were far better horsemen out there to serve as cavalry who were non-citizens. Okay? The Numidians, the Spaniards, and the Gauls could, pardon the expression, ride the pants off of the Romans when it came to cavalry. Sorry, that's a bad expression. Okay. But the Roman, at the time that Rome's army was professionalized, and even before that, Rome came to rely more and more on non-citizen allies to provide the actual cavalry on the battlefield. In the period of the Republic, the main role that the Ordo Equestris, or the Equites, filled was as Rome's merchant class. One of the things that is kind of hard to understand about ancient Rome, although maybe there are ways to wrap your mind around it, although it might insult some of you, is a Roman viewpoint that people who engage in business, in trade, okay, in buying and selling, are somehow potentially slightly less respectable than people who make their money by owning land and growing things and then, selling that in a large market. Okay? Do you guys know any professions in the world of buying and selling that are viewed as slightly shady, disreputable in the modern world? Not to engage in stereotypes. Oh.
Well, I don't know if it's appropriate, but the drug trade.
Oh, well, the drug trade, I would say, yeah, definitely illegal and full of danger and so on. But let's talk about a trade that is entirely legal.
I was going to say smuggling, so never mind.
You were going to say what?
Smuggling.
Smuggling? Okay. All right.
The political areas, kind of like they.
Okay, but politics isn't really supposed to be about trade. I mean, sure, they're disreputable politicians, but we're talking about something that, every American citizen at some point is going to do, go buy something or perhaps sell something and deal with a person who has a slimy reputation, not because they're a slimy person, but because of an undeserved reputation that they're tricksters or cheats.
Walmart workers.
Oh my goodness, no. Okay, maybe times have changed. I was referring to the stereotype about.
Oh, I was just gonna say like real estate.
I was going to say used car salesman, but potentially real estate. I don't know. There's some real estate developers who do some kind of shady things. But again, I don't want to indulge in stereotypes. But are you guys aware of that sort of stereotype about used car salesmen? Okay. They want to give you a car that's not worth so much, but get maximum money from you. At least that's the stereotype. Okay. Now, I'm overindulging in discussing that stereotype. It's taking too much time. What I really want to say is that the Romans sort of had an ingrained, no pun intended, an ingrained preference for wealth from land ownership and agriculture. Get it? The whole ingrained. Gosh, these kids are slow. All right. So, the Romans felt that land ownership passed from generation to generation, led to less shady dealing, that trade was slightly less reputable. And you might think about how the Romans elevated the highest social class to those people who had their money in land, not to those people who made money by buying and selling and trading. Okay. All right, questions? Okay. This is something that I forgot to mention yesterday. Remind me to come back to why wealth mattered in ancient Rome. Okay, remind me to come back to that. But before we come back to that, let's move on to the third broad social class, called the plebs in Latin. Okay? Or in English, the translation is the Plebeian Order or the Plebeians. Okay. Right. Any of you know where this word shows up in modern use today? Yes?
When you first went to military school.
Yeah. If you were to, like a number of my former students have, join the United States Military Academy, get admitted to the United States Military Academy at West Point. The lowest people in the world of the U.S. Military Academy are first-year students. They're called plebes, okay? As a way of looking down on them, of showing contempt, kind of the way some people do for junior high students at Devlin. No offense, junior high students. Or even worse than junior high students?
Seventh graders.
Freshmen. Okay. Sorry, just kidding. There's nothing wrong with freshmen. Yes?
Is there, what's declension of plebs?
Plebs plebis is third declension. Okay? We are just that far away. Oh, I can almost taste it in lesson 40, learning the third declension. Okay? I can't wait. Okay? It's like a cold popsicle on a sunny, overly hot day.
It's not sunny outside.
This is why I'm not giving you the popsicle. Okay?
We had a cold popsicle today. If you like the lesson, authority lesson.
Okay. Jake, how about we put you outside in the snow and let you freeze overnight and you become a popsicle for coyotes? Okay? Oh wait, no, that would not be good. Oops, I just recorded that. Oh no. All right. Okay. It's all right. Okay. Backtracking to the actual point of this PowerPoint. The plebeian class, or plebs, truly represented the vast majority of Rome's population. They were the vast majority, but they had the least power, the least wealth, the least prestige, and the least opportunity to participate in Rome's government, which is one of the reasons why Rome's government had some turmoil and ups and downs. Okay? All right. Remember, the senatorial class, maybe 2% of Rome's population. The equestrian class, maybe 13 to 15% of Rome's population. The plebeian class, which was really a wide spectrum of people, very wide spectrum of people, okay, made up about 85% of the population. One of the things I'm not doing well, because I'm very self-conscious right now, is pointing out everything on the previous slide. Didn't I say that the minimum property qualification for the equestrians was 500,000 sesterces? Was that on the slide? Oh my gosh, I'm failing. Okay, backtrack. Minimum property qualification through most of Rome's history for the Equestrian Order, 500,000 sesterces. Half what it took to be a senator. All right, sorry about that. Now we've got it going forward. Okay. Think about the range between 499,000 sesterces and 0 sesterces. It's a big range, isn't it? Say yes.
Yes.
So that range from no land at all, no money in land at all, to maybe 400,000 sesterces worth of land and property, all of that included the plebeian class. It would include, to give an equivalent in the modern world, perhaps, okay, everyone from the poor guy in the cardboard box on Colfax, all the way up to me. Now, I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm fairly prosperous. I have a home, I own it with my wife. I'm still paying on it, but that's okay. I have a vehicle, can send my kids to college, and so on. So that's a really big spectrum. And in the ancient world, that spectrum incorporated about 85% of Rome's population. They were, in terms of their social class, all grouped together. We will look and see that they were, in fact, further subdivided when we start talking about the assemblies. Okay. All right. The wealthier members of the plebeian class served originally as Rome's infantry and persisted in serving as Rome's infantry for many, many, many centuries. Okay. Right? Until Rome's army was professionalized, and then the property qualification to serve as an infantryman was lowered down to 0. All right. Within the plebeian class, there was one particular subgroup which was commonly referred to by a particular name, okay, and designated this for a particularly important reason. Okay. This was a group, it was a subclass within the plebeian order called the proletarii, or to use the modern word, the proletariat. What do you guys know about the proletariat? Don't read what's on the slide yet. ever heard the word before? Yes, Emma.
Um, like,
Okay. Joy?
I don't know, like, shows you're above someone, kind of look down on them.
So if you're kind of looking down on them, you might refer to them as the proletariat.
Yeah.
Okay, you've heard expressions like that. It can happen that way. Okay, Peter?
Or even like ideal Marxist stuff, he calls on the proletariat, the lowest, the peasants, to sort of reform the societies.
Okay, all right. So this is really getting very far afield from the Romans, but it's a really important idea in discussions that you would have in your social studies classes about the government as a senior, and also in U.S. history. Because you have to, in dealing with U.S. history, as an 11th grader, at some point, and maybe even in, did you guys discuss it in the history of the Russian Revolution in Western Civ? As a 9th grader in Western Civ, you'll also discuss this. The idea generated by Karl Marx came to be known as Marxism or communism, in which Karl Marx urged, as Peter more or less said, the peasant classes of Russia and other countries to rise up and seize control of land and so on, and put that land in the hands of the government. So, it's an important term that shows up outside of Roman history. But there's another place where it shows up. Okay? 10th graders, we're kind of short on 10th graders. We have Emma. Do you remember 1984?
yeah.
And the term proles in 1984? When you guys are in British literature in 10th grade, in George Orwell's novel 1984, not to tell you what the English teachers will tell you, which is a novel set in a crazy, bad, wrong future where the government has seized control of everything. In that view of an evil world where people have no freedom of choice and so on, they are referred to, the common people of that society are referred to as proles. Kind of building on what Marx put forward as the idea of the proletariat, the poor people of Europe rising up. Anyway, you'll see it in a couple other places, but in ancient Rome, proletariat was a specific subset of the plebeian class. They were the people in ancient Rome who had no land at all. The only contribution that they could make to Rome, to the continued existence of Rome, was not through owning land and growing crops and feeding the people of Rome by selling their crops. It was by having children, having offspring. The word proles in Latin means offspring. Why is having offspring a good thing? In ancient Rome, and I'm not encouraging it here in the Latin 2 classroom.
It's like to create more Roman citizens that can be helpful to Rome.
Exactly. As Rome was a civilization, always be beset with war and disease. Okay? Rome needed fresh citizens. And the only way that that happens in the ancient world is biologically. Okay? And there was the hope that even if, let's put me back in the role of a member of the proletariat or the proletariat way back in ancient Rome, even if I never owned any land, there was the hope that maybe my children, okay, would prosper enough and have opportunities enough where they could own land. But at the very least, they would provide a source of population for the future of the city. All right, questions about the social classes? I know you still don't know why this is important. So go ahead and ask, why is wealth important in the ancient world? Yes?
Because the government didn't pay for things, the people in the government did.
Very important point. The government did not always have lots of money to pay for things like aqueducts or roads or equipping soldiers. The government counted on citizens to pay for building aqueducts or roads or bridges or temples or equipping soldiers. Okay. Good point. Second good point. There's a theory. I don't know if you will agree with this theory. You can think it's great, you can think it's bogus, I don't care. There's a theory that people who have wealth in a community are the best people to make decisions about that community. Why? Yes.
Because they have the most power in a community.
No, I'm not saying why they're the most likely people to make the decision, but why it's the best or wisest choice to let them make the decision.
Because then they can invest their money in it.
Potentially, building on what Ryan had to say, but Shadia?
Because if they know how to keep their money, then they can help keep it, or they can't. If they get the money, then they can't really hold it.
Okay, all right. So there's a complex idea in there, and let me try to draw out of it what I think Shadia is saying. That people with money know how to manage it and hold on to it. And whether it's money in the bank or money on Wall Street or money in the forms of land and slaves that work the land and produce crops that are sold year after year, the people who know how to manage complex operations, whether they're business operations or agricultural ones, and know how to preserve the wealth that they have, are the best people to make decisions for the community, to preserve the wealth of the community as a whole. Okay? There's also a theory that says that the people who have the most at stake if the community goes down the tubes should have the most say in the decisions that might lead to the community being saved or going down the tubes. In other words, if, how do I want to say this? If I bring 5 pizzas to a party and Joey brings 1, okay, should he have a decision about how the pizzas are shared out? Or whether they're put in the freezer to save for a rainy day or a snowy day when Joey's locked in a cabin all by himself and he's dying of, no, sorry, just kidding. You're not going to have Joey locked in the cabin. Okay? All right. So, there were 3 factors. Factor number 1, the wealthy people contributed to the economic well-being of Rome and the military safety of Rome by building, by equipping troops, and so on. Second, they have managerial experience, okay, which might transfer from running their farm operations to running the government. Third, they have the most to lose if things go wrong in the community. And if they have the most to lose, they're going to work hardest to make the best decisions. And to recap, those are 3 reasons why the Romans continued to divide people into social classes. That's also the reason why, as we're going to start to see in the operation of the Republic, the Romans began to give more power to people who are wealthy, to give them more of a say in the government. Okay. All right. Quick question from you, based on your reading in Ecce Romani. What instrument allowed the use of social classes? Yes.
Census?
The census, okay, which was held every 5 years to conduct an inventory of people's property, their land holdings, and so on. It was also used to look into other characteristics of a person and to assign them to their social classes. Okay. We've already addressed this question right here, okay, a little bit ahead of it. Okay. What beliefs underlie the Romans' classification of citizens by wealth? That wealthy people maybe have more to give to the community, will make wiser choices, and have the experience to lead well. All right. Third, we're thinking about what positive outcomes, maybe positive outcomes, do social classes create. I don't want you to give the impression, I don't want to give you the impression that Rome's social classes were all about wealthy people telling poor people what to do. Okay? And that was, on occasion, a consequence of it, as we'll talk about with the secession of the plebs and so on. But if you are, you know, drawing up a blueprint of Roman society, what positive outcomes do social classes perhaps create?
Before they professionalized the military, we had some organization of the classes.
Okay, so to repeat what Maggie said, before the professionalization of the army, it allowed for people to be organized in anticipation of, you know, military service. Is that a good paraphrase? Okay, that's a good point and observation, because the classes were really important in the organization, training, and fighting of Rome's army.
They do it not just on money, but also on land.
Okay, well, and what's positive about that? So, I mean,
So it's not like you just have a bunch of coins, you actually have a physical.
okay, all right. So, if I can paraphrase what you're saying, that they judged on the basis of land holdings, not just in terms of cash in the bank, or cash buried underground, or cash buried in, you know, Owen's piggy bank. What can land? What's the benefit of having the wealth? I don't want to say it. The wealth invested in land rather than hoarded in some hiding place.
Because land is not as hard to steal. Like you can't really steal somebody's land.
Okay. It's true. It's harder to steal land than a hoard of treasure, but there's a second
Land
dimension
is
to it.
also an indicator of responsibility. Like it's, you know, it takes certain responsibilities to work and maintain land. If you just have a hoard of treasure, it's not so much that indication of how responsible you are.
Okay. So the management of your land can be an indication of your responsibility and your effectiveness as a manager, to use that term. Okay. Which is more productive? This is the question I want to throw at you. Which is more productive, to build on Emma's point? A hoard of coins that's stuffed under your mattress, or land which is put to agricultural purposes?
Land.
Land. Okay. All right. So that's potentially a really good point. Let me put one more out there before you. It's one I mentioned way back in Latin 1, if you were in my Latin 1 classroom. Okay. If there aren't social classes, how do Romans make decisions?
Well, probably it would be by force.
Who could force whom?
Like the people with a lot of money could force the people without a lot of money.
Perhaps. Maybe they could force them or coerce them. What is the social structure that exists in Rome that helps to tie powerful people in a position of greater authority over lower class people? In other words, if there's a policy being debated, okay, a policy, a law that's being debated, okay, and it's only the senators who get to vote on it. Let's say that that's true. Let's pretend that that's true. Okay, who's going to be making the decision? Well, these senators. Okay, but how are they going to be? I want to say this. How are they going to be shaping the opinions and beliefs of the people who are not powerful senators? What's the institution that links people in Roman society from poor to slightly less poor to fairly wealthy, but even this fairly wealthy guy is still dependent upon a powerful and rich senator to get business done, to get representation in court cases?
Well, the senators making decisions about all of the system, people will want to have.
Hey, not here anymore.
True, true. Let's take it out of the realm of the government for just a moment. Maybe I'm doing a bad job on this. I think I am. Okay. Owen is having a dispute. With whom?
Charles.
Charles. Okay. All right. Charles is Mrs. Nowicki's pet. Let's pretend. Okay.
You don't need to pretend.
Owen is Mr. Mancuso's pet. Let's pretend. Okay. All right. they can't solve their dispute themselves because they're not allowed to, let's pretend in this fake world that I'm creating where these guys are pets, okay? They're not allowed to speak to Mr. Edwards about the problem they're having. Instead, Mrs. Nowicki and Mr. Mancuso are going to do the speaking for them. Imagine that transferred from this crazy situation we have here to ancient Rome, where Owen lacks the expertise to speak in a court of law. And so he goes to someone who is older, wiser, more powerful, and richer to speak in the legal dispute he's having with Charles. There is a term for that institution between lower class people. Sorry, Owen and Charles, you're lower class people. Okay, you're only 8th graders after all. And upper class people, a mutual tie of dependence that often made its way into politics. It is the patron-client relationship. Okay? And if in ancient Rome there are no social classes, many important decisions are going to be left to the patrons in the patron and client relationship chain. Discussion is going to be kept up there in the patron circle of people. Okay? All right, so imagine a proposal of a law, and I have to end this very, very soon, of a law that would end the practice of selling people who are in debt into slavery. Okay? If you are a poor plebeian and you are in debt and you're having trouble paying it back because your crops fail, wouldn't you want that law to be passed?
Yes.
Say yes.
Yes.
How about your patron who loaned you money? No. He wants his money back. He doesn't care whether it's through you repaying him over the long haul or the quick haul of selling you into slavery and pocketing that cash to pay off the debt. Okay? So a patron might not view that issue the same way as a poor citizen might. What do social classes create?
A definite division between them.
Kind of, sort of. But if Owen wants to change the situation and have this law passed that prevents citizens from being sold into slavery, in a world without social classes, who must he talk to if he wants to get this law approved? He's got to talk to the patron. The very guy who is eager to see Owen sold off into debt so the patron can pocket his cash. What does a social class create? The opportunity for Owen to talk with Joey, to talk with Jay, to talk with Charles, to talk with Maggie, to talk with Cynthia, to talk even with Emma over there. Why? Because you are all in the same class. And it gives citizens a venue, an opportunity to have important discussions about politics and maybe begin to have a say in politics that doesn't come directly through the mouth of the patron. Yes?
So it increases the communication between.
Yes. It increases the communication between people of the same social class. They can begin to form their own opinion in a way that is independent of their own personal situation and the demands of their patron. After all, would Joey care if Owen is sold into slavery?
No.
Probably not. Okay? Probably not, unless Joey starts to think, wow, maybe that could happen to me too. And if Owen and Joey have a chance to start talking about that, they might begin to form some different ideas than what they had received down the food chain from their patron. Okay, we're going to stop, which is not the best stopping point.